Good. Okay, everybody sits down? Yes. Good. Welcome. Let me just say a few words to introduce Mike. In 1977, when I joined the Harvard economics department, I think it's fair to say that this was not a congenial place. It was basically a juxtaposition of kingdoms and kings. And you didn't feel very welcome. But there were a few people who were very different from that. And one of them was Mike. And that's when we met. And he took me under his wing and made life much easier for me, much nicer for me. And you have to realize at the time I was a lowly assistant professor, and he was already God, or very close to that. I mean, he had done this breakthrough work on signaling. He was dealing with asymmetric information, had major results. And for those of you who have worked on problems with asymmetric information, it can get very messy very quickly. And the beauty of it was that Mike's work was incredibly beautiful from just an aesthetic point of view. I think there was content to it as well, but from an aesthetic point of view, it was, so I think we were all in awe of him, and that's when we became friends, and it has lasted ever since. Then Mike decided that theory was too easy, I think, or something like this, and moved on to be first a dean at Harvard, and then a dean at Stanford, and then dabbled in high tech and finance, and learned a lot about the world. And we met off and on, but we met again in China in 2007, I think, in which we were asked to analyze what was going on and what the problems of China were going to be. And we had a great time, and I would say with a lot of modesty that our work was premonitory in the sense that much of what has happened and what we think now should happen, basically we nailed. And it was just a great pleasure to work with Mike in a very different capacity as we had many years earlier. And so today we basically are going to listen to Mike's ideas, which are contained in the book that you can buy. I think outside. And I think Mike has put his finger on maybe the main economic event of the last 50 and the next 50 years, which is the fact that a very large group of countries, and what we call the emerging countries, but that's more calling as a result of what they are doing, are catching up, are basically going from poverty to the technological frontier. And this is completely changing the world in all kinds of ways, clearly for themselves, but also for advanced countries and for the tensions which emerge. And his book is an attempt to get at the issues, try to look back and try to look forward. And I think it's a very important book. I've read it, and I think it's a very important book, but let me just stop here. I think, Mike, you want to talk for half an hour and then take questions? Thank you. Very good.
Thank you so much, Olivier. That was awfully generous. I have to tell you, I have had many failures in my life, and the ones that I regret most are the loss of a gifted faculty member. And when Olivier went back to MIT, that one got to the top of the list and has remained there for the rest of my life. I'd like to. I'm not going to try to tell you everything in the book. I think I would like to do is tell you a little bit about what's in it and why I wrote it. You know, I had the privilege of working in China with Olivier and Ed Lim and a number of others. I had the huge privilege of chairing the Growth Commission with a distinguished group of political and policy leaders. And as I said in the preface to the book, I learned an enormous amount from Mahmoud and our colleagues, and came to have a better understanding, at least than I did, of the sort of dynamics of high-speed growth in the catch-up mode in the emerging economies in the developing world. And I wanted to share some of that because I found in talking to investors this, and others, this growth, if it's relatively remote from their lives, is somewhat puzzling. So they say questions like, is it sustainable? And I say, well, you have to look at the dynamics and that we know seem to work and see if you can find a missing piece and so on. So that's what I was after, but I framed it in a much longer time horizon. Something like this, that we know from the work of Angus Madison and others that there wasn't much growth in the period up to the British Industrial Revolution. And we know that the pattern changed dramatically at that point in the UK and then continental Europe and what Angus Madison calls the European offshoots, that's us, and the Canadians and Australia and New Zealand. But that affected roughly 15% of the world's population, and the colonial systems were in place, and basically the remaining 85% of a growing global population stayed on approximately the course they were on before, with some effects from the industrialization and growing wealth. And that went on for 200 years, and until the end of World War II, when the colonial empires broke down, when a bunch of wise people created the IMF and the World Bank, set out to make sure that the disastrous performance of the vanquished after World War I was not repeated. The global economy was opened up when the GATT was created and started to function, and technology produced a huge headwind in opening the global economy. And we started something that I think it's fair to say nobody could see at the time, which was, with faltering starts and varying starting points, a pattern that I eventually came to call convergence, which is this process of taking the 15 privileged percent that in this 2 centuries of divergence and starting to close the gap with a guess, that a hopeful guess, but I think a realistic one, that at the end of this century that started after World War II, which we're a little more than halfway through, we'll have, if we're lucky, 75, maybe 80% of the world's population, and we're well on our way. The 2 future economic giants are in high growth mode. I don't want to sound flip about this. There's a lot of hard work that goes into sustaining growth like this, both within countries and now increasingly globally, to create stability in an environment in which it can occur. But I think it's a reasonable guess that if something really bad doesn't happen, we'll triple the global GDP in the next few years. Probably 20, maybe more than triple. I mean, it only takes 3.7% growth globally to triple the global GDP by 2030. So I think what Olivia said is right. So what I tried to do in the book is to sort of set the stage, then present what I think is now common knowledge among all of you, among the members of the Growth Commission, the world of people who have worked very hard to accelerate and sustain this growth so people could understand the growth model and then look to the future. And I do believe that we are at a bit of a crossroads in the global economy where the way I've tried to describe it to less expert groups of people than those in this room is, China started growing 31 years ago at pretty high rates, accelerated quite rapidly to somewhere around 9% growth. But if you drop back 20 years and say, well, what difference did that make in the global economy? The answer was very little, right? Fast forward, 20 years to the present, and you get 9 or 10% growth, and you're talking about very large, shifts in the composition and whatnot of the global economy. And so it isn't just growth, but it's the cumulative effect of growth that's interesting. And I believe we're at a crossroads in which the emerging economies are systemically important in multiple dimensions. Again, that won't come as news to you. But it isn't just growth. I mean, you can fool yourself by saying, well, we've had 31 years of high-speed growth. That's the world we're living in. And you can see it in all kinds of places. The McKinsey Global Institute study on global investment rates suggests, I think quite plausibly, that the declining investment rate that we experienced in the 50 years after World War II is about to reverse, essentially because the investment rates are higher in the emerging economies and their weight in the global economy is bigger. So I want